Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
And welcome to it, a Star Wars show here on My Nerd World. I'm your host, John Justice. Happy Halloween when I'm recording this episode. When you think about Star Wars, it doesn't really go along necessarily with Halloween, but I always think about Star Wars. Well, I always think about Star Wars in general. That's an evergreen statement. But when it comes to Halloween and Star Wars, it's more about when I was a kid and how popular Star Wars was, the Halloweens that took place when I was still going out and trick-or-treating, the costumes, and especially those early, mid-'80s costumes where you had the plastic masks and the shirts that went along with them that actually had the image of the characters on them. I always get a kick of seeing the photographs around the Halloween season of people from their past and classrooms and the kids all dressed up. I mean, Halloween just isn't what it used to be when I was a kid and the streets were just filled with costumed kids going and trick-or-treating. And, of course, when I was younger, so many of those costumes were Star Wars costumes on Halloween. So they've certainly, especially since Disney purchased Lucasfilm, which was 12 years ago this week, which is interesting to say the least, there have been some Halloween-themed, Lego shows, but nothing like specific relating to Halloween. But, like so much of Star Wars, it really does center around the holidays, whether it's, as I mentioned, dressing up as a Star Wars character on Halloween, or the fact that the films in the Disney era were coming out around Christmas time relating to the holidays as well. So the good news is, regardless of how long that we have to wait for the next theatrical release, of which we'll be talking about here in just a moment, we always have the classic films to go back and watch. So let's get into this week's stories. We have a couple of news items to cover before we dive into an interesting theory that I came across while prepping for this week's show relating to Revenge of the Sith.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
First off, it seems like every week there is some sort of mention or update relating to what I'm simply referring to as the Star Wars Episode 10 film. This is the Daisy Ridley Ray-led post-Episode 9 movie that we've heard so much about. The writer, Stephen Knight, most notable for his work on the Netflix series Peaky Blinders, has left the project. And this is now the second or third writer that's left the Daisy Ridley-led Star Wars film. Damon Lindelof being the one who initially was working on this project, left only to have Stephen Knight take over, and apparently now he's left the project as well. Now, Daisy Ridley did appear on the David Horowitz podcast this past week. He asked her about this film, and she was quoted as saying, "We're waiting for imminent news, I would say. I might have already seen something. There might be a date of when we're, the next stages." So here's it's a pretty vague statement, apart from we're waiting for imminent news. I might have seen something already. She was smiling when she made the comment. On the podcast, it was also a video of it available as well. My guess on this is that, Stephen Knight has left the project, but he probably left the project a while ago. And Lucasfilm has more than likely already gone and made the decisions in terms of who will be taking over moving forward. And I also expect that we'll end up seeing a change in directors. We have the Mandalorian and Grogu film as the next movie to be released in the Star Wars franchise. And while I have, tempered expectations for this, I'm still very much of the opinion that Lucasfilm needs a saga story to tell. It's not episode 10. I'm referring to it as episode 10 because essentially it is episode 10, meaning it comes after episode 9. And while, again, I'm looking forward to The Mandalorian and Grogu, that saga story, even if it's not going to be connected with the Skywalkers, is still going to be what keeps the franchise alive. So my expectation is we'll probably hear about a new writer and probably a new director, and why Lucasfilm doesn't go with a seasoned director at this point in time, I don't know, and my expectation is that's probably going to happen. I have absolutely nothing to base that off of in terms of tangible information. It's just my gut feeling. So Daisy Ridley says something is imminent. Stephen Wright has left the project as its writer, and my expectation is sometime probably in the new year we'll get an update on it. I'm not expecting anything between now and the holidays.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So on last week's episode, I reported that the Mandalorian and Grogu film had wrapped filmmaking. However, according to Bespin Bulletin, that's not the case. Bespin Bulletin writes, what I've heard from two sources is that the Mandalorian and Grogu film could film until around December. One source outright said December, and the other said nearly 2 months. It was mentioned that many cast members had concluded work on the film, and perhaps this is why it was thought to have finished filming. Nobody has said this part to me. It's my speculation, writes Bespin Bulletin. But it's possible that on paper, principal photography has concluded, but the filming is ongoing. Either way, The Mandalorian and Grogu is still filming for now. One source did mention that the film has planned reshoots, not a huge surprise, a regular practice and nothing for fans to be concerned with, they write. I don't know if those reshoots are taking place during this period that runs until December or sometime after. The Mandalorian and Grogu is due to release on May of 2026, giving Lucasfilm plenty of time to shoot the flick and go back for pickups and reshoots. It was mentioned previously that Pedro Pascal was expected to shoot scenes for The Mandalorian and Grogu later this year. Pascal has been busy filming the Fantastic Four First Steps for Marvel and Disney since July, and that film is expected to wrap in November or December. Pascal is also gearing up to embark on the promotional tour for The Gladiator 2, which releases in theaters on November 22nd. And it was pretty famously reported that when you get to Season 3 of The Mandalorian, there was very little of Pedro Pascal, if any, actually on screen in the full suit and the helmet, that there was another actor that was doing most of those scenes. I try to keep my mind off of that when I watch The Mandalorian and Grogu, because if you pay too close attention, you can actually tell when Pedro Pascal isn't in the uniform based off the body language of the actor and when he is in the uniform. But clearly, for The Mandalorian and Grogu, they're not going to keep the Mandalorian's helmet on for the entire portion of the film, so there will need to be, at some point in time, some images or some filming with Pedro Pascal out of the helmet. So those can be done separately, because I imagine there's probably not going to be a ton of the Mandalorian Din Djarin without his helmet on in the movie. And again, I'm looking forward to this film as I would any Star Wars movie, but I'm very much still waiting for that next saga film and for Disney and Lucasfilm to get their act together when it comes to this franchise that I love so much. Perhaps the Skeleton Crew will scratch the itch of new Star Wars content coming up here in a couple of months.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Now we move off of the news and we get into a bit of the storytelling. In the article that I have here, Star Wars is in its Sith era. The Skeleton Crew just accidentally revealed a huge Sith connection, and I think this is pretty cool. After revealing so much about Palpatine's plans in the sequel trilogy, the story keeps getting drawn to the dark side of the Force, most recently with The Acolyte. The next live-action series, Skeleton Crew, seemed like it would change that with a family-friendly adventure centered around children, but now new promo images suggest the series will be just as tied up in the dark side lore as its predecessors. The latest issue of Empire magazine contains new images from Skeleton Crew, including one of Jod Nawood, the adult lead played by Jude Law. He appears to translate a language written on a wall. Now, it's not just any language, however, but the Ur-Khaat, and I'm probably saying this wrong, Khaat, the runic language of the Sith. The language originated in the non-canon Tales of the Jedi comic books, but has since appeared in the canonical shows like The Clone Wars, Rebels, The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka. The Sith species spoke the language, but as they evolved into the Sith Order, the language evolved too. The language was forbidden after the rise of the Galactic Republic and was thought to be eradicated, but it thrived in secret. Emperor Palpatine spoke it and taught it to Darth Vader, to name just 2 practitioners. Now, this runic language of the Sith has appeared in Star Wars before, but its appearance in the Skeleton Crew is especially interesting. It looks like Jod Nawood, who's only been described as a Force user, can indeed understand it, which means he is either involved in the Sith somehow or just really into defunct languages with sinister connotations. Perhaps Nawood is a reformed Sith who put the dark side behind him and is using the Force outside of an established order, like Ahsoka did after she left the Jedi. If so, that makes his relationship with the rest of the main cast of Skeleton Crew, a bunch of children, all the more interesting. What makes him get involved with them, and could we see his dark past come back to haunt him? We can only speculate, but it looks like Skeleton Crew won't be the standalone story we thought it would be. And I had always kind of assumed that it would tie into the larger Mando verse with Ahsoka, Book of Boba Fett, and the Mandalorian. And with its inclusion in the photograph and in this show, we also saw this language written on the temple on Peridia in the other galaxy in Ahsoka as well. And so there could be a connection there too. Skeleton Crew premieres December 3rd of 2024, so it's just a little bit over a month away on Disney Plus. We've been doing a rewatch of Stranger Things, and I hope that Skeleton Crew can live up to that. It is frustrating when I'm watching other series that have been successful, and we look at what's happened with our beloved Star Wars and how they just haven't been able to nail it. There's been successes. That's not to say that that's not the case. The Mandalorian had 3 seasons, and the 4th season is going to be turned into a theatrical release, as we've been just talking about. But at the same time, you look at what happened with The Acolyte. You look at what happened with 1 season of Book of Boba Fett and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which was supposed to be a limited series, but in and of itself has been my biggest disappointment. I watch a series like Stranger Things, and while it's probably not fair to compare Stranger Things because expectations are pretty much zero going into a show like that, there is no denying how good that show is. And I hope that Star Wars in its live-action streaming form can really reach that mark, and perhaps the Skeleton Crew series will do just that. I have my hopes up after watching Stranger Things again. Not based off of what I've seen so far in terms of the trailers. I think they're just okay, but we'll see what happens when it debuts on December 3rd.
This is not going to go the way you think.
And lastly, on this week's episode, I just thought this was interesting. I found this article, 25 years since the prequel trilogy hit theaters. Some questions remain still about the fall of the Galactic Republic. Major moments, like the duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi, have been nitpicked to Naboo and back. Their showdown in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, is arguably the best part of the prequels, and if you're going to go and watch any Star Wars film on Halloween, I would think Revenge of the Sith would be the one to watch, especially with all that takes place with the battle, of which we're going to discuss right now on Mustafar. But it's not, the article goes on to say, without its head-scratching moments. One in particular has plagued the fandom for years. In the battle's final moments, why does Anakin flip over Obi-Wan's head, giving his mentor the perfect opening to slice off his limbs? I think it was something that George Lucas just thought would be cool in terms of getting that scene to where it needed to be. However, the answer does vary depending on who you ask. According to the stunt coordinator, Nick Gillard, the sequence was originally shorter and more efficient, with Obi-Wan cutting Anakin in a defensive move. It was Steven Spielberg who reportedly pitched a longer, more elaborate finisher, but Anakin's motivation has never been explained. Fans assumed his final move was simply an act of desperation after Obi-Wan famously gains the high ground. It's possible Anakin was rashly trying to reverse the situation on his master, but another theory attempts to explain Anakin's flip by tying it to a different iconic battle from the prequels. And it's an approach Christensen himself seems to agree with. Christensen discussed Anakin's duel with Obi-Wan in a recent appearance at SpaceCon in San Antonio. When asked why Anakin would try and jump over Obi-Wan, Christensen initially attributed the choice to his arrogance of youth. Later, the actor cited a popular fan theory that suggests Anakin was inspired by the legendary battle from Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. When Obi-Wan defeated Darth Maul had the high ground, and Obi-Wan did this amazing flip. Christensen said, fans have assumed the duel between Obi-Wan and Maul later became legend in the Jedi Order, so it would make sense that Anakin grew up hearing the story time and again. By the time he's fighting Obi-Wan on Mustafar, his master's past feats are well known. So Anakin, in the back of his head, he hears Obi-Wan say, I have the high ground, and he's like, I'm going to show him, the actor added. It just didn't play out the way he'd hoped. Now, the theory is amusing, but it also makes Revenge of the Sith even more tragic. Anakin, in his hubris, thought he could beat Obi-Wan by copying his most legendary move. Obi-Wan ended up with the upper hand regardless, forcing Anakin to learn a lesson the hard way. It's a great way to add context to a scene that's already pretty memorable. Although, you have to wonder how many months Anakin spent ruining his gamble while he was recovering from his triple amputation. You learn something new every day. Listen, that's this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did recording it. And if you want to support my nerd world, I hope you'll go and check out the science fiction space opera adventure series EMBARK. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with sci-fi. It's written for adults, fantastic for kids ages 11 plus. Pick up EMBARK Book 1 today. 7 books in all in the series, all available in ebook, Kindle Unlimited, if you're a part of that service, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. If you like your science fiction space opera, like Star Wars, to be epic, filled with amazing technology, romance, and action, EMBARK is perfect for you. In EMBARK Book 1, Taft has found something, and humanity won't survive without it. When ship mechanic Taft Guardia agrees to help gifted starfighter pilot Keitha Morrow investigate a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father, they embark on a perilous journey of discovery amid a looming planet-wide industrial catastrophe. In the middle of a global evacuation, 2 rival megacorporations are on the brink of interstellar war, as Taft, Keitha, and their ragtag crew discover what may be the only hope of saving Earth's evacuees from annihilation. I hope you'll go to Amazon.com, search for EMBARK and John, Jon, John Justice, and pick up this fast-paced and action-packed science fiction adventure today. So head on over to Amazon. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. I hope you have a fantastic Halloween as we head into the holidays. I'll be back again next week with whatever news may come out from a galaxy far, far away. Until then, I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.